of establishment politics and establishment economics. It is the sound of a people who want a government that represents all of us, not just wealthy campaign contributors. You know, we began this campaign about 11 months ago, and when we began, we had no money, no political organization, no name recognition. Other than that, we were doing really good. But a lot has happened in the last 11 months. When we started, we were 3% in the polls, about 60 points behind Secretary Clinton. There was a poll out today, a national poll. We were up by 2 points. Three or 4 weeks ago, there were polls done here in Pennsylvania, had us 25, 30 points behind. Today there was a poll out that had us 4 points behind. Over the last several weeks, we have won 7 out of 8 caucuses and primaries. And we have won most of them by landslide numbers. And what momentum looks like is that in national poll after national poll, we are defeating Donald Trump big time. The reason that I think our campaign is doing as well as it is we are treating the American people as intelligent human beings. And we are addressing the real issues facing our country. All of you know that truth, whether it's in our own personal lives or politically, is not always pleasant. But you don't go forward if you simply take reality and you bury it under the rug. You got to deal with it, you got to address it, and you got to resolve it. And that is what we are doing in this campaign. We are asking the hard questions, and we're coming up with the real solutions. For a start, let me say something that gives me no joy in saying it, but it is true. Today we have a corrupt campaign finance system which is undermining American democracy. Democracy is not a complicated process. It means one person, one vote, not billionaires buying elections. coming up when you have a handful of billionaires like the Koch brothers and some others spending some $900 million in this campaign cycle to elect candidates who represent the wealthy and the powerful. That is not democracy, that is oligarchy. And we will not allow that to happen. And when we talk about democracy, it is not Republican governors all over this country have a handful of suppress the vote and making it harder for and some others spending some $900 million in this campaign cycle to elect candidates who represent the wealthy and the powerful. That is not democracy, that is oligarchy. And we will not allow that to happen. And when we talk about democracy, it is not Republican governors all over this country trying to suppress the vote and making it harder for people to participate. And I say to those Republican governors, if you don't have the guts to participate in free and fair and open elections, get out of politics, get another job. In my view, if you are 18 years of age in Philadelphia or Mississippi or Alabama or any place else, you're 18, a citizen, you have the right to vote, end of discussion. But it's not just a corrupt campaign finance system that we have to address. It is a rigged economy. And I'll tell you what a rigged economy is. A rigged economy is today when the top 1/10 of 1% now owns almost as much wealth as the bottom 90%. A rigged economy is when the 20 wealthiest people in this country own more wealth than the bottom 150 million Americans. A rigged economy is when one family, the Walton family of Walmart, owns more wealth than the bottom 40%. And let me tell you how this economy is rigged even more than that. It is rigged because Walmart, owned by the Waltons, pays wages that are so low that many of their workers have to go on Medicaid and food stamps. And guess who pays for those Medicaid and food stamps? The middle class does. It seems to me a bit crazy for working families in the middle class to have to subsidize the wealthiest family in this country. So I say to the Walton family, get off of welfare, pay your workers a living wage. But it's not only an unfair distribution of wealth, income is unfairly distributed as well. All over this country today, Philadelphia, in Vermont, all over America, we have people working 2 or 3 jobs just to cobble together the income and the health care that they need. We got moms working full-time. We got dads working full-time. We've got kids working full-time. We have marriages being stressed out. We have young people not getting the attention they deserve from their parents. And at the end of all of that, 58% of all new income goes to the top 1%. And that is why together we are going to create an economy that works for all of us, not just the people on top. But it's not just a corrupt campaign finance system or a rigged economy. It is a broken criminal justice system. Now, what this campaign is about is asking the American people to think outside of the box, to think outside of the status quo, to understand that the status quo we have year after year after year can in fact change if we want to make it change. Today in America, now listen to this, shamefully in our country, we have more people in jail than any other country on earth. China is a communist, authoritarian country. They don't tolerate dissent very much. 4 times our size. We have more people in jail than China. Now, what we have got to do is get to the root causes of those problems and resolve them. Cause number 1. No one talks about it. The media doesn't talk about it. Here is an important fact. Today in America, we have an outrageously high rate of youth unemployment. Kids who graduate high school between 17 and 20, if they're white, 32% are unemployed or underemployed. Latino, 36%. African American kids, 51%. Now, it seems to me to make a lot more sense for us to invest in our young people in jobs and education and not in jails and incarceration. And we need major reforms of police departments around this country. Now, I was a mayor for 8 years, and I worked with police officers in my state and police officers all over the country. Vast majority of police officers are honest, hardworking, and they have a very difficult job. But if a police officer breaks the law, like any other public official, that officer must be held accountable. We need to end the demilitarization of local police departments. We need to make police departments reflect the diversity of the communities they serve. We need to end the privatization of jails and detention centers. We need to rethink the so-called war on drugs. Now, it turns out that over the last 30 years, millions of Americans have received criminal records for possession of marijuana. And the reality is that today, under the Federal Controlled Substance Act, marijuana is listed as a Schedule I drug, the top of the list, right next to heroin, a killer drug. Now, a lot of people argue the pluses and minuses of marijuana, but marijuana is not heroin, that's for sure. And that is why I have introduced legislation to take marijuana out of the Controlled Substance Act. Now, the decision to legalize marijuana is a state issue, not a federal issue, but I don't believe that possession should be a federal crime. When we talk about drugs, I can tell you that in my own state, neighboring New Hampshire, all across this country, we have an epidemic of heroin and opiate addiction that every single day people are dying from overdosing. This is a national tragedy and a national crisis. I believe that the best way we deal with that crisis is not looking at addiction and substance abuse as a criminal issue, but looking at it as a health issue. Now, the other day, I think Secretary Clinton appears to be getting a little bit nervous. We have won 7 out of 8 of the recent primaries and caucuses. And she has been saying lately that she thinks that I am, quote unquote, not qualified to be president. Well, let me just say in response to Secretary Clinton, I don't believe that she is qualified. If she is through her super PAC taking tens of millions of dollars in special interest funds. I don't think that you are qualified if you get $15 million from Wall Street through your super PAC. I don't think you are qualified if you have voted for the disastrous war in Iraq. I don't think you are qualified if you have supported virtually every disastrous trade agreement which has cost us millions of decent paying jobs. I don't think you are qualified if you supported the Panama Free Trade Agreement, something I very strongly oppose, and which, as all of you know, has allowed corporations and wealthy people all over the world to avoid paying their taxes to their countries. This campaign is gaining momentum because we are listening to the American people, not wealthy campaign contributors. We are listening to working people. And what workers are telling me is they can't make it on $7.25 an hour, or $8, or $9, or $10. What workers are telling me is that we need a national minimum wage of $15 an hour. In America, if you work 40 hours a week, you should not be living in poverty. This campaign is listening to senior citizens and disabled veterans. And as the former chairman of the Senate Committee on Veterans Affairs, I have done and will continue to do everything that I can to protect the men and women who have put their lives on the line to defend us. But what seniors and disabled vets tell me, they can't make it on $11,000 or $12,000 a year Social Security, and they're right. Amazingly, we got Republicans running all over this country. They want to cut Social Security benefits. Well, I've got some bad news for them. We're not going to cut Social Security benefits. We're going to expand Social Security benefits. This campaign is listening to young people. And what young people are telling me all across the country is, how does it happen when we do the right thing and we go out, we get a college education, we end up $30,000, $50,000, $70,000 in debt? Why are we being punished for getting an education? People who get an education should be rewarded, not punished. And that is why we're going to do two things. Number one, in the year 2016, when we talk about public education, it is not good enough to talk about public education being first grade through 12th grade. And here's why. Here is why. 50 years ago, you went out and you got a high school degree. The likelihood was that you can go out and get a pretty good job and make it to the middle class. But the world has changed, the economy has changed, technology has changed. People today need more education. That is why I believe that when we talk about public education today, we should be talking about making public colleges and universities tuition free. This is not a radical idea. This is a very commonsensical idea. Number one, countries all over the world, Germany, Scandinavia, other countries, they already have free college education. Number two, you may not know this, but 50 years ago in the United States, our great public colleges and universities were virtually tuition free. Thirdly, I grew up in a family that did not have a lot of money. My parents never went to college. All over your state, all over here in Philadelphia, there are kids, parents never went to college, and the idea of them going to college is about as likely as going to the moon. But I want those children in Pennsylvania and in Vermont and all over this country to know that if they do well in school, they take school seriously, if they do well in school, that regardless of the income of their families, yes, they will be able to get a college education. We also have to do with the fact that millions of people today are carrying very heavy loads of student debt. Anybody here with student debt? Oh, welcome to the club. And this is what we have to do with that. We have to say to those people with student debt that you can refinance your loans at the lowest interest rates you can find. Now, there are people out there who say, well, Bernie, you're like Santa Claus. You're giving away, free tuition in public colleges. You're lowering student debt. How are you going to pay for it? I will tell you how we're going to pay for it. All of you know that 8 years ago, as a result of the greed, recklessness, and illegal behavior on Wall Street, this country was driven into the worst economic downturn since the Great Depression of the 1930s. I believe that it is absolutely appropriate today to impose a tax on Wall Street speculation. When Wall Street was in trouble, the American people bailed them out. Now it is their time to help the middle class of this country. This campaign is listening to women. And women are saying that they are tired of working for 79 cents on the dollar compared to men. And I know that every man in this arena will stand with the women in the fight for pay equity. There is no economic reason for women being underpaid. It is just old-fashioned sexism. We will end that. This campaign is listening to our brothers and sisters in the Latino community. There are 11 million undocumented people in this country. Many of them are exploited because they have no legal rights. They are working for below minimum wage, and they have no protection. And many of them are living in the shadows and living in fear. I agree with the Latino community. We need comprehensive immigration reform and a path towards citizenship. And if the Congress of the United States does not do its job, I will use the executive powers of the presidency to make it happen. This campaign is listening to our brothers and sisters in the African American community. And they are telling me, how does it happen that we can spend trillions of dollars fighting a war in Iraq that we never should have gotten into, but we don't apparently have the necessary funds to rebuild inner cities throughout this country. Five or 6 weeks ago, I was in Flint, Michigan, and what I saw and heard in Flint, Michigan is something that was very difficult to deal with. It really was. Because what I did is talk to some parents whose children were poisoned as a result of their disastrous water system and lead in the water. And these parents, one mother told me that she had a bright young girl. Kid was doing great in school, very gregarious, very warm. 2 years later, that kid was in special education, could barely remember simple things. But it's not just Flint, Michigan. There are communities all over this country with failing water systems, with wastewater plants in need of repair. In my state of Vermont, many of our bridges are in serious disrepair. Our roads need work. We used to have the best cutting-edge rail system in the world. No longer the case. Airports need work, levees need work, dams need work. We should invest $1 trillion rebuilding our inner cities, affordable housing, infrastructure. And when we do that, we create 13 million decent paying jobs. Tell me why there are communities all over this country where kids are getting inadequate education, find it difficult to get access to health care, where housing is either non-existent or extremely expensive. We can do better than that. And if we can rebuild the infrastructure in Iraq and Afghanistan, we sure as hell can do it here in the United States. This campaign is listening to a people whose voices are very rarely heard, and that is the Native American community. Anyone who has studied American history knows that from day one, when the first settlers came into this country, Native Americans were lied to, cheated, and many treaties negotiated were abrogated. We owe the Native American people a debt that we can never, ever repay. And among many other areas, they have taught us that we are part of nature, that we cannot destroy nature if we are going to survive. I was just talking to a woman in Wisconsin the other day, and she was telling me that some of these tribes, when they make decisions, they make decisions based on how it will impact the next 7 generations. And there's a lot to be learned from that. I am a member of the U.S. Senate Committee on the Environment. I have talked to scientists all over our country, all over the world. And what they have said, virtually unanimously, climate change is real. It is caused by human activity. And it is already doing devastating harm to our planet. We have a moral responsibility to make certain that the planet we leave our children is a healthy and habitable planet. And that means summoning up the courage to take on the fossil fuel industry, to transform our energy system away from fossil fuel to energy efficiency and sustainable energies. And when we do that, not only will we lead the world in combating climate change, but we'll also be creating millions of decent paying jobs. Now, I have been criticized for saying what I'm going to say, so I'm going to say it again. And that is, health care is a right of all people, not a privilege. The United States of America is the only major country on earth not to guarantee health care to all people. Together, we are going to change that. Now, the Affordable Care Act that President Obama led the effort on has done some very good things. It has ended, you all remember this obscenity from the private insurance companies called pre-existing conditions. You remember that? One of the stupidest concepts in the history of the world. And that's gone. We've added 17 million more people to the ranks of the insured, and we have done away with discrimination against women who are paying too high prices for their health care premiums. But today, despite the gains of the Affordable Care Act, 29 million people still have no health insurance. Many of you are underinsured with high deductibles and high copayments. And we are getting ripped off every single day by the drug companies. Who charge us the highest prices in the world for the medicine we use. If you want to hear about crazy, this is crazy. 1 out of 5 Americans who go to the doctor and get a prescription are unable to afford to fill that prescription. We got senior citizens all over this country cutting their pills in half because they can't afford the medicine that they need. And meanwhile, the 3 top drug companies in this country made $45 billion in profit last year. And on top of all of that, we spend far more per capita on health care than do the people of any other country. And that is why I believe that we must pass a Medicare for all health care system. Health care as a right will transform our society. It will mean that workers do not have to stay in a job they don't like just because it has decent health insurance. It will mean that young people can get entrepreneurial and go out and start their own businesses. And have health insurance. It means that people in America will not be going bankrupt when they end up in the hospital. Now, I know there is a lot of concern about the candidacy of Donald Trump. So let me assure you, Donald Trump is not going to become president of the United States. He will not become president because the American people will not elect a president who insults Mexicans and Latinos, who insults Muslims and women, who insults veterans, the American people will not elect Donald Trump president because they understand that what this country is about is bringing people together. Our strength. That is our strength as a people in this arena. There are people who come, whose families come from hundreds of countries. We are different colors. We are different religions. And that is our strength as a people, coming together. And coming together always trumps dividing us up. The American people understand. They understand that what life is about is people helping people. Your family is in trouble. I got to be there for you. My family is in trouble. You got to be there for me. We have got to support each other. We cannot turn our backs on children who are hungry or veterans sleeping out on the street. And the American people understand that that sense of togetherness always trumps selfishness. And maybe most importantly, the American people have learned what every major religion on earth has taught us. Christianity, Judaism, Islam, Buddhism, whatever the religion. What those religions have always taught us is that at the end of the day, love trumps hatred. Everybody here knows that real change never takes place from the top on down. It is always the bottom on up. A 100 years ago or more, when workers were working 7 days a week, 12 hours a day, when they were being treated like they were beasts of burden, workers came together and they said, you know what, we are going to be treated with dignity. We're going to form a union. For hundreds of years, African Americans and their allies stood up and fought back. Some were beaten, some died. But they said together that in this country, racism and segregation and bigotry are not acceptable. People forget this. People forget this. But 100 years ago, which from an historical perspective is not a lot of time, 100 years ago, women in America did not have the right to vote, did not have the right to get the education they wanted or the jobs they wanted. It's 100 years ago, no time at all. But what women did with their male allies, they stood up. And they went on hunger strikes. They were arrested, some of them died. But together the women of this country and their male allies said that in America, women will not be treated as second-class citizens. Now, if we were here, say 8 years ago, and somebody jumps up and says, you know, Bernie, I think that gay marriage will be legal in 50 states in this country. The person next to him or her would have said, no, you're crazy, that can't happen. But what happened is for decades, and this is how change always happens, the gay community and their straight allies stood up, and what they said, is that in America, people should have the right to love whoever they wanted, regardless of their gender. But to accomplish that, the gay community had to struggle through incredible bigotry and hatred. But they stood together and they fought back. Let me give you one more example, even more contemporary. If we were here 5 years ago, no time at all, somebody jumps up and they say, you know, Bernie, there's $7.25 an hour minimum wage. It's a starvation wage. We've got to raise that minimum wage to $15 an hour. The person next to him would have said, $15 an hour? You want to more than double the minimum wage? You're crazy. Maybe we can get $8 an hour, maybe even $10 an hour. 15, that's not, you're thinking too big, you're too radical. But then what happened over the last 5 years is workers in the fast food industry went out on strike. And they made their case to the American people, and the American people heard them. And then what happened is Seattle, $15 an hour. San Francisco and Los Angeles, 15. California, Oregon, and New York State, 15. If I have anything to say about it, that will be the minimum wage in 50 states in this country. But here is the main point that I want to make in that regard. What media tries to do and essentially what the establishment tries to do is to kind of limit your options, to get you to think small. They give you the choice, and Congress does it, and politicians as well. And they say, well, the choice we have is should we cut education by 2% or 4%? But we don't have to accept those options. We have got to go into our own hearts, and we have got to determine what kind of country we want and what our options are. And what is happening today, and I sense it in my gut all over this country, is that millions of people are looking around them and they're saying, why is it that we have more income and wealth inequality than any other country? Why is it that people are working longer and longer hours and almost all new income is going to the 1%? Why is it that we are the only major country on earth that doesn't have paid family and medical leave? Why is it that major corporations, in some cases, make billions of dollars a year in profit, don't pay a nickel in federal taxes? Why is it that young people, simply for getting an education, are leaving school with tens of thousands of dollars in debt? Why do we have more people in jail than any other country? Why are we the only major country not to guarantee health care to all people? Why have corporations shut down all over this country, thrown American workers out on the street, gone to China or Mexico? Here is the point. We can change that status quo. When we stand together, when we don't allow demagogues to divide us up, when we have a vision for what this country can be, and when we are prepared to fight for that vision, there is nothing that we cannot accomplish. On April 26th, there's going to be a very, very important primary here in Pennsylvania. And here is the truth. The truth is that when voter turnouts are high, we win. When voter turnouts are low, we lose. I hope very much that on April 26th, you will make sure that Pennsylvania is part of the political revolution. Thank you all very much.